In my 23 years of galactic warfare, I had seen Krell berserkers rip mechanoid walkers apart with their bear claws. I had watched the Lorian shadow assassins phase through solid bulkheads to butcher entire command staffs in their sleep. I had commanded armies against the most terrifying biological nightmares the universe could vomit forth. But I had never known true, paralyzing fear until I put a 70-kilogram human into a lethal combat simulation and watched her get bored. The realization still haunts my waking cycles. The Galactic Council did not invite the humans to our academy to teach them how to be soldiers. They invited them so they would not accidentally conquer the rest of us. It began 3 weeks earlier during the morning intake. I stood on the observation deck of the Galactic Defense Academy, my forearms crossed over the ceremonial battle scars on my chitinous hide. As the Academy's senior combat instructor, I had absolute authority. My word was law, backed by a service record that included the siege of Krell Prime and the legendary single combat that ended the Zentarian War. I expected to mold the galaxy's elite. Instead, they sent me humans. I watched the human exchange students file into the courtyard below. Their pathetically soft bodies moved with what they probably thought was military precision. They were entirely bipedal, possessing no natural weapons, no dermal armor, and no apparent enhanced strength. Their skin was entirely exposed to the elements. They looked like something a predator would feed to its young. My aide, Lieutenant Crixtal, attempted to blend into the shadows behind my command chair. I pointed an armored finger at the datapad in his hands. I demanded to know why the council was wasting our resources on primitive meat bags from a backwater system. Crixtal stuttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He tried to tell me that Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world. He suggested there might be more to their biology than our initial scans indicated. I cut him off with a sharp click of my mandibles. A death world classification merely meant their planet was actively trying to kill them. It meant they were good at surviving natural disasters and biological plagues. It did not make them soldiers. It did not give them the reflexes necessary to survive a galactic theater of war. I told Crixtal I had seen domestic house pets with better combat instincts. The human squad consisted of 6 individuals. They were utterly unremarkable in every physical metric. Their leader was a female named Maya Blackwood. According to her dossier, she stood 1.7 meters tall. She possessed a meager 70 kilograms of biological mass. The file boldly claimed she was a specialist in close-quarters combat. I laughed out loud when I read that line. The sound echoed off the observation deck walls. As if any civilized species would be caught dead fighting within arm's reach of a hostile target. Close combat was the domain of the armored Krell or the regenerating Mordanians. For a squishy, fluid-filled mammal to claim expertise in melee combat was nothing short of a biological joke. The first week of training confirmed every prejudice I held. The humans fumbled with our standard-issue plasma rifles as if they were holding live thermal detonators. Their movements were stiff, hesitant, and agonizingly slow. During basic firearms instruction, the entire academy gathered at the firing range to practice long-distance engagement. Blackwood managed to accidentally discharge her weapon into the permacrete ceiling 3 separate times. 3 times. The heavy plasma bolts scorched the expensive overhead shielding. Even the Florbonian slug creatures, beings completely devoid of a central nervous system, possessed better trigger discipline. I marched across the training yard, my heavy boots cracking against the ground. The other cadets fell silent. I carried the authority of a veteran who had personally ended planetary conflicts. I stopped directly in front of Blackwood and demanded an explanation for her gross incompetence. She turned to me. Her face was entirely blank. Her dark eyes locked onto mine without a trace of intimidation. She did not salute. She did not cower. She claimed it was an equipment malfunction. Her voice was flat and mechanical. She stated that the trigger sensitivity of our plasma rifles was improperly calibrated for her species' muscle fiber density. Equipment malfunction. I had heard every excuse in the galaxy during my service, but humans seem to have a particular talent for creative explanations. I leaned down, bringing my compound eyes inches from her soft face. I told her that she was a liability. I told her that soft-bodied mammals would not last 5 minutes in a real war zone. I promised to break her before the cycle was over. Blackwood simply nodded. She turned back to her station and carefully, almost painfully slowly, picked up another rifle. The rest of the academy took notice of the humans' apparent weakness. Sharks always smell blood in the water. Throck'n'Al, a massive Krell battle spawn, made a sport of tormenting them. His family lineage was steeped in the blood of 300 Zentarian warriors. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick, interlocking plates of natural bone armor. During the midday meal, Throck'n'Al loomed over the human table. His armored shadow swallowed the entire squad. The mess hall was packed with elite cadets from a dozen different predator species. Throck'n'Al slammed his heavy fists onto the metal table, rattling the humans' nutrient paste tubes. He loudly suggested that the Death Worlders needed training wheels for their rifles. He asked if they needed the academy staff to chew their food for them as well. The entire mess hall erupted in cruel, barking laughter. Every apex predator in the room found the humans absolutely hilarious. The Thalorian infiltrators hissed in amusement. The Mordanians pounded their chests in mocking approval. I watched from the high table, waiting for the humans to snap. I waited for the righteous fury that even the weakest prey animals show when backed into a corner. I wanted to see them throw a punch so I could legally expel them for striking a superior species. Blackwood slowly looked up from her meal. Her dark eyes met Throck'n'Al's towering, three-eyed gaze. There was no fear in her expression. But more unsettlingly, there was no anger either. Her voice was perfectly steady, devoid of wounded pride or emotional distress. She told him it was an interesting suggestion and that she would take it under consideration. Then, she casually went back to eating her nutrient paste. The laughter in the room faltered. Throck'n'Al looked confused, his primitive brain struggling to process the lack of resistance. He snorted in disgust and lumbered away. I found Blackwood's reaction deeply unnatural. I mistook her mechanical stoicism for absolute cowardice. They had no pride. They had no understanding of hierarchy or dominance. They came from a world where they had somehow lucked into the role of apex predator, and they did not understand how outmatched they were on the galactic stage. Over the following weeks, the harassment escalated drastically. The other cadets realized the humans would not fight back. Training equipment would mysteriously malfunction whenever the humans tried to use it. Their sleeping quarters were ransacked. Their meal rations were swapped with expired, foul-tasting emergency supplies. It was standard hazing, designed to filter out the weak. Through it all, Blackwood and her squad endured the abuse with chilling silence. They never complained. They never reported the infractions. They just moved through the academy like biological robots, accepting every insult and physical shove without a single retaliatory strike. It infuriated me. It offended my warrior sensibilities. I decided they needed a demonstration of what real galactic power looked like. I decided to humiliate Blackwood so profoundly that her entire squad would resign out of sheer shame. 3 weeks into the training cycle, I initiated the Advanced Combat Simulation Chamber. It was the crown jewel of the academy. The massive spherical arena utilized hard-light holographic technology to create physical enemies. The scenarios were designed to push warriors to their absolute breaking point. The physical impacts were real. The pain feedback in the cadet armor was real. The only thing simulated was the actual death of the cadet. I ordered the entire academy into the observation galleries. Hundreds of elite cadets and veteran instructors pressed against the reinforced glass, eager for the show. I called Blackwood down to the arena floor. She stepped forward, her regulation boots clicking against the metal decking. She wore our standard adaptive armor. The plates were designed for heavily muscled species. On her frail frame, the armor looked like an oversized costume. She secured her neural interface headset and checked her sensory enhancement gear. I activated the chamber's holographic projectors. A ruined urban cityscape materialized around her, complete with the ambient sounds of distant explosions and crumbling permacrete. I picked up the master microphone. My voice echoed through the acoustically perfect dome. I announced to the gathered crowd that we were going to see what happens when Death World arrogance encounters true galactic standards. I ordered Blackwood to begin Standard Urban Assault Pattern Alpha 7. It was a basic movement drill. Any competent soldier could clear the building in 10 minutes. But I had absolutely no intention of letting her clear it. From my secure command console, out of sight of the other instructors, I initiated a manual override. I bypassed the standard cadet safety protocols. I switched the simulation parameters to the illegal, lethal level Death World mode. I cranked the enemy combatant speed and aggression algorithms to their absolute maximum. I secretly disabled the pain limiters on her adaptive armor. I wanted the crowd to hear her scream. I wanted to break her spirit permanently. The first wave of holographic enemies materialized. They were Krell shock troopers, massive and heavily armed. They breached a ruined storefront ahead of her, moving with terrifying speed. They laid down a suppressing field of heavy plasma fire that shattered the simulated concrete around Blackwood's position. Blackwood dove behind a ruined wall. She moved sluggishly, burdened by the heavy tactical gear. She raised her standard-issue plasma rifle to return fire. Then, the turning point of my entire military career occurred. Under the extreme stress of the sudden, lethal-level assault, Blackwood squeezed the trigger of her rifle. There was no bright flash of plasma. There was only a sickening, mechanical crunch. The reinforced polyalloy of the rifle's firing mechanism literally shattered inside her grip. The metal casing snapped. The power cell sparked, hissed, and died. She had crushed the weapon's core components with her bare hand. Laughter rippled through the observation deck above. Frockenniel pounded his massive fists against the glass, roaring with amusement at the human's sheer clumsiness. I leaned toward my microphone, prepared to berate her for destroying expensive military hardware. But the words died in my throat. I watched the telemetry feeds on my private monitor. Blackwood did not panic. She did not call for an instructor. She did not ask for a weapon replacement. She looked at the crushed rifle in her hands. She looked at the lethal level holograms closing in rapidly on her position. A strange, slow exhale escaped her lips. Her shoulders visibly dropped. The rigid, inefficient, defensive posture dictated by our galactic standard training completely vanished. Her body language transformed in a fraction of a second. The facade evaporated. She dropped the broken alien rifle onto the rubble. She reached down to her utility belt and drew a primitive, unenchanted blade of human high-carbon steel. A simple combat knife. The first holographic Krell trooper lunged over the barricade, its massive claws extended for a decapitating strike. Blackwood did not try to block the blow. She did not try to retreat. She stepped directly inside the creature's guard with a speed that defied basic physics. My compound eyes could barely track her physical movement. One moment she was standing still, the next she was a blur of calculated, kinetic violence. She drove her carbon steel blade upward, sliding it effortlessly beneath the Krell hologram's heavily armored chin plate. The blade bypassed the interlocking bone armor completely. The system registered a lethal neurological sever. The hard light hologram dissolved instantly into pixelated mist. The observation deck above fell dead silent. The mocking laughter was sucked from the room as if an airlock had blown wide open. 2 more holograms charged her from the flank. They were Thalorian assassins, programmed to phase rapidly in and out of the visible spectrum to disorient their prey. Blackwood did not even look at them. She pivoted on her heel, her body coiled like a hypertension spring. As the first assassin materialized to strike her blind spot, she intercepted it. She shattered its simulated knee joint with a crushing side kick. The sound of digital bone snapping echoed like a gunshot through the dome. Before the second assassin could fully materialize, she spun, grabbed its extended arm, and used its own forward momentum against it. She hurled the 80-kilogram assassin through a solid permacrete wall. The structural damage sensors screamed in warning as the concrete shattered. I gripped the edge of my command console. My sharp claws gouged deep metallic grooves into the control panel. I frantically checked the system readouts. I searched the code for a glitch, an error in the physical simulation engine, a corrupted gravity parameter. There was nothing. The hard light constructs were functioning perfectly. They were applying maximum lethal force. The physics engine was operating at normal galactic gravity. And this soft-bodied, unarmored primate was dismantling elite warriors with her bare hands. Blackwood moved through the simulated urban environment like a natural disaster. She was no longer employing our slow, methodical tactical doctrines. She was utilizing unrestrained human close-quarters combat. It was a terrifying, fluid dance of brutal efficiency. She did not fight to wound. She did not fight for dominance or honor or to display superiority. She fought to absolutely eradicate anything that stood in her direct path. A heavily armored Mordanian berserker simulation dropped from a rooftop directly above her. It swung a massive gravity hammer designed to crush light vehicles. Blackwood did not flinch. She slid forward across the rough ground, her knees scraping the permacrete. She passed completely beneath the crushing arc of the weapon. In one seamless, continuous motion, she severed the hologram's hamstring cables with her blade, stood up behind the massive beast, grabbed its armored head, and snapped its cervical vertebrae with a sharp, violent twist of her bare hands. The sheer physical force required to do that to a Mordanian neck was astronomically high. It was mathematically impossible for a creature of her low mass. I stared at the raw biological telemetry streaming across my screen. The truth hit me with the force of an orbital kinetic strike. My internal organs felt like they were turning to solid ice. Maya Blackwood had never been clumsy during weapons training. She had never been failing to grasp our tactical movements. She had been physically struggling to limit her own biological output. Human muscle density, forged under the crushing gravity and brutal atmospheric pressure of a Class 12 death world, was fundamentally terrifying. Their muscles were not soft. They were impossibly dense, hyper-compressed biological servos. She had not accidentally misfired the rifle because of poor hand-eye coordination. She had been accidentally crushing the delicate, highly calibrated triggers because our weapons were simply too fragile for her immense grip strength. She had been holding back. The entire human squad had been holding back. They had endured the bullying, the terrible food, the hazing, and the constant physical insults because they were terrified of accidentally killing the other cadets. They had accepted Thrakanael's abuse because if they had ever decided to push him back, they would have punched a hole straight through his chest cavity. Down in the arena, the simulation escalated to its final, impossible wave. 10 elite Krell shock troopers, armed with heavy plasma repeaters, formed a firing line across the street. The system was mathematically designed to ensure cadet failure at this exact stage. There was no cover. There was no tactical retreat. Blackwood wiped a single bead of sweat from her forehead. She did not seek cover. She sprinted directly toward the firing line. The system calculated her trajectory and fired dozens of lethal plasma bolts. She evaded them. It was not luck. She was making micro-adjustments to her gait, reading the microscopic shifts in the hologram's targeting postures, and predicting the firing algorithms before the weapons even discharged. She dove behind a destroyed hover transport. She grabbed a slab of jagged permacrete debris that weighed easily 200 kilograms. She hoisted it over her head without a single grunt of exertion and hurled it with terrifying velocity. The massive debris smashed into the center of the Krell line, completely shattering their organized formation. Blackwood vaulted over the transport, landing directly in the middle of the chaotic group. The ensuing slaughter was over in 6 seconds. She used their own massive weight against them. She deflected heavy strikes with bone-breaking parries. She moved with a ruthless, cold-blooded geometry, calculating angles of attack and exploiting microscopic structural weaknesses in their armor that our greatest tactical minds had never even noticed. The last Krell hologram fell, its simulated chest cavity utterly crushed by a devastating open palm strike. The simulation arena powered down. The ruined cityscape dissolved back into a sterile, spherical metal room. The emergency lights flickered on. The silence in the observation deck was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence born of primal, evolutionary terror. I slowly turned my head to look at Thrakenel. The massive, boastful Krell warrior was pressed hard against the back wall of the gallery. His 3 eyes were wide with naked, unadulterated fear. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He realized, in that exact moment, that he had spent the last 3 weeks intentionally aggravating an apex predator that could have separated his head from his shoulders on a whim. Every cadet in the room was staring down at the arena floor, their minds entirely broken by the paradigm shift. Down in the chamber, Mia Blackwood stood amidst the fading pixels of her defeated enemies. She was barely breathing heavy. Her dark hair was still perfectly secured in its tight regulation bun. She casually reached up and adjusted the collar of her training uniform. She slid her primitive carbon steel knife back into its sheath. She looked up at the observation deck. Her dark, flat eyes found mine instantly through the reinforced glass. She did not gloat. She did not pound her chest. She did not demand respect or an apology for the weeks of abuse. She simply looked at me with the cold, patient irritation of someone waiting for a delayed transport ship. Her voice carried perfectly clearly through the chamber's audio system, echoing in the deadly quiet of the military academy. Warm-up complete. When does the actual training start?